Good morning, everyone. Good to see you this morning. Glad that you're here. We've been talking for several weeks about struggles that we have with some of the emotions that we feel and how we need to seek out God's truth and figuring out how to behave correctly, to glorify God with those emotions. And today I want to read to you from the book of Isaiah, chapter 6. And here's what it says. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And then I said, Here am I. Send me. These verses begin with this reference to a guy named King Uzziah. He was the king of the southern kingdom of Judah. He was 16 years old when he became king, and you read the story of his life, and he starts off really well, right? He led Judah in this very long era of prosperity. But as he aged, what did he become? He became very proud. And kind of his turning point is when he decided that he was going to enter into the temple of the Lord, and he was going to offer incense on the altar. That was something that was reserved only for the priests. That's only what the priests were allowed to do. And so because of that arrogance, God strikes him with leprosy. And we find out that he reigns for 52 years, but he died with leprosy in approximately 740 BC. And this is when God calls Isaiah. He's most likely a part of the royal family. There are some people who believe he might have been a priest in the temple as well. But God calls Isaiah. Why does God call Isaiah? He calls him because after many years of prosperity, God's people had begun chasing after foreign gods. They started worshiping the Baals. And because of this, guess what's coming? God's judgment is coming upon Judah. And not just them, but the surrounding countries around them as well, who had worshiped these false gods. So Isaiah, we read in that chapter, Isaiah has this vision. And it's really also a realization, okay? He has a vision, but it's also a realization. Because what does he say in that section? He said, the king is dead, right? The king is dead. King Uzziah is dead. But the real king is still reigning on his throne. Did you get that there? The king's dead, but the king is on his throne. Isaiah says that Uzziah, the king who had led through decades of prosperity. He's gone, but God still reigns. So Isaiah has this vision of God. And this vision that he has of God automatically convicts him of his sin, right? He says, I'm toast, right? Automatically convicts him of his sin. I'm a man of unclean lips. I live among people of unclean lips. What is he referring to there? What Isaiah is referring to is that he has called upon the name of false gods. He's admitting that he had called upon the name of false gods. He maybe even had kissed the idols of the Baals and Asherahs, right? And how does the true God feel about that? Like when the prophet Hosea addresses a very similar issue, it says, "In that day declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. I will remove the names of the Baals from their lips." The name Baal actually means my master, right? And so it's kind of a play on words there in Hosea. So Isaiah says, hey, I have unclean lips. I have unclean lips. The people that I live among, they have unclean lips. So we read here, this heavenly being which is there singing around the throne of God is called a seraph. Seraphim is plural for seraph, right? And it has 6 wings. The word seraph means burning one, right? He goes over and he takes a coal from the altar. He touches Isaiah's lips with the coal, and Isaiah is told that his sins have been forgiven and his sins had been atoned for. And the very next thing we see in these verses is God basically says, okay, I need a volunteer. Anybody willing to volunteer? I need a volunteer. I need somebody to go to Judah and to declare my message to these people. Do I have a volunteer? Anybody? And notice, he doesn't here outright command Isaiah, does he? He doesn't just outright command Isaiah. He leaves an invitation out there. He says, I want someone to volunteer to go and do this thing for me. And then here is Isaiah, a man who just realized he's toast. A man who just realized his sins had been forgiven and atoned for. When God says, I need a volunteer, what did Isaiah say? Here I am. Send me. You need a volunteer? I'll go for you, God. You need a volunteer? I will do it. I will represent the courts of heaven to a fallen world. I will stand up among these people, and I will represent you. This will be my life's goal from here on out. This will be my mission from here on. This will be my purpose. That's what Isaiah is saying there. Here I am. Send me. And Isaiah would not only live for his God, he would not only stand up for his God, he would not only proclaim the word of his God. Tradition tells us that Isaiah also dies for his God. Tradition says that Isaiah actually was beheaded during that bloody reign of King Manasseh, right? 2 Kings 21:16, Manasseh shed very much innocent blood until he had filled Jerusalem from one end to the other. Beside the sin that he made Judah to sin, so that they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So, as we think about some of the struggles that we deal with, today what I want us to kind of focus on is, do you feel unfulfilled. Do you feel like your life doesn't have a purpose? Do you feel like you don't make a difference? We yearn with this, I think. I think really it might be a part of the image of God within us where we want to make a difference, right? We want to be productive and make a difference. It shows itself in people at different degrees from one person to the next, but we all want to make our mark on the world, right? We all want to make a difference in the world. We want to help. We want to contribute. We want to leave things better than we found them. There needs to be a purpose behind it all. I heard one commentator talk about this is why so many people in this generation consider themselves social activists. Do you ever realize that, how many social activists there are? Even among atheists, this commentator said, explained that modern activism is the atheist's replacement for religion, right? And I think that a part of that, there's that impulse that I think it gets perverted when it's not tethered to a belief in God. If we don't let God's word guide the expression of that impulse. But there is something inside human beings that make us want to have a purpose to our lives, right? And so today I want to ask you, do you feel unfulfilled? Because God made you with purpose. Anybody believe that this morning? Raise your hand if you believe that. God made you with purpose. Through this series, we've been looking at Old Testament prophets, and there is this recurring theme as we look at these prophets and their writings. It's a theme that these prophets believed that God knew them and had a purpose for them even before they were born. Anybody notice that theme as we've been going through this? When we studied it on Wednesday night, I think we talked about that a little bit, where there's this theme that these prophets are like, God, you knew me even before I was born. You knew me in the womb. Jeremiah believed that, right? Now the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Jeremiah believed that God knew him even before he was born. David believed that. He said, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when I was yet there, when as yet there was none of them. And then, even here in Isaiah tells this in his writings, right? I will say to the north, give up, to the south, do not withhold. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the end of the earth, everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, and whom I formed and made. Even when he gives like the messianic prophecies, when Isaiah talks about the Messiah, this coming servant of God, he says things like this: listen to me, O coastlands, and give attention, you peoples from afar. The Lord called me from the womb, from the body of my mother. He named my name. So here's this recurring theme that even from the womb, God has what for us? God has purpose for us, right? God knows us. So if you're feeling insignificant, if you're feeling unfulfilled today, know this: God made you with purpose and intention. And a lot of times we feel unfulfilled because the things that we are seeking after are unfulfilling. A lot of times we feel unfulfilled because the things that we're seeking after, they don't fill us, right? We try to satisfy that need for purpose with other things. We try to fill that with money. And does money do it? Money doesn't do it. Sometimes there's thrill in the chase, right? The chase is thrilling, And once it's achieved, what do people who have achieved these things find out once they've achieved it? It's unfulfilling, it's empty. Some people look for that in lust. They look for a sense of meaning in those things. Some people chase the thrill, but at the end, it leaves you feeling empty. The same thing with possessions, the same thing with the want for recognition. And even with the social activists, what do you find out? No progress is good enough, is it? No progress is good enough. And it turns into this endless push for more and more. We have been made with purpose. What purpose? You see, this is why some feel unfulfilled, because they think the point to life is self-gratification, and no matter what they do, they never feel gratified. Well, what is the point of life? Is there one? Is there a point to life? I think it could be seen in the realization that Isaiah came to when he saw God. Realize, governments rise and fall. Nation states come and go. There are going to be times of prosperity. There are going to be times of hardship. But in the big picture, God is still the king of everything. Anybody believe that this morning? And so Isaiah sees God, and he's convicted of his sins. Once he is forgiven, his life becomes all about serving the King who will reign forever. Once he is forgiven of his sin, his entire life becomes about serving his King. This is why there are even, I think Christian people who feel unfulfilled. It's because we think everything is about Jesus forgiving me, right? We think everything is about Jesus forgiving me. We come to Jesus, we ask Jesus for forgiveness, and then we think, and then we go about our own business from then on, right? We think, okay, I've been forgiven, now I can go about my own business. And we don't realize that once we accept that forgiveness, our business has changed. Once you accept the forgiveness of God, your business has changed. Your life must change. Yes, we need to stop the sinful things that we used to do, but you know what? Our purpose has changed. Our life purpose has changed. We need to rediscover what we were made for. As human beings, this is probably a part of our problem. We've forgotten our purpose. Do you remember those words all the way back in the book of Genesis? Do you remember how it started out? Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. And here is the connection that a lot of people do not make. I've spoken a lot about, being Jesus ambassadors. We are to represent Jesus in the world. That is not a new thought. That is not a new thing. That isn't something that the Apostle Paul just came up with when he wrote 2 Corinthians 5:20. This is what it means when it says that human beings are made in the image of God. We were actually created to represent God in the creation. We were made to do that. We were made to be like God as we oversaw everything that was going on the earth, right? And when we come to Jesus, yeah, we've sinned. Yeah, we messed that up. But when we come to Jesus, guess what's restored? The image of God is restored within us. And we're meant to be Christian. You are meant to be Jesus in your world. Isn't that what John says, 1 John chapter 4:17? As he is, so also are we in the world, or as the NIV renders it, in this world we are like Jesus. This is the purpose for which God made you. First, he made us to bear his image. We ruined that when we chose sin. But when we accept Jesus' forgiveness, that image is restored in our lives, and we are to be a living representation of God, and we are to be advancing his kingdom. Man, talk about a cause that is worth investing in. Talk about a cause. And in that is fulfillment. Because it meets the very thing we were created for. Final thing I want us to point out today is if you're here and you're feeling unfulfilled, is the recognition that God's people, when we do that, when we represent Jesus, when we become image bearers of God, God's people leave a legacy. Your faithfulness to God's purposes speaks volumes to those who are around you, and it will impact people for generations. Our stand for Jesus is something that will ripple through families, through communities. It will very literally change lives and restore people. This is how the gospel made it here. This is how the gospel made it to Felicity, Ohio. You know how it made it here? Some Pharisee in the Middle East found his purpose. Some dude over in the Middle East found his purpose. Jesus called him, and he was faithful to what Jesus called him to do. And so that gospel, that good news of Jesus, continued in his life. And guess what it did? It spread into someone else's life. And then someone else's life. And then someone else's life. And then someone else's life. And here we are, a few thousand years later, and the words we read in scriptures are still just as relevant. And Jesus still offers forgiveness and empowerment and purpose. We started off talking about Isaiah. Did Isaiah leave a lasting legacy? Did Isaiah leave a legacy? Yeah, he lost his life for what he believed. What he wrote in the service of God, though, lives on, especially these amazing chapters that we read in his writings like Isaiah 53, where he tells us of something that's coming. From his perspective, it's still coming, right? And what does he say? He says, but he, because he's talking about the servant of God, that's off in the future from his perspective. He says, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Today, why don't you come forward if you want to accept the sacrifice of Jesus? But today, God is seeking people who will take the gospel to the world. God has given us a message. And God is looking for volunteers to carry it. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And then I said, here I am. Send me. Let's all stand up together today as we sing. If you want to make a decision for the Lord, you come forward today.